Hello guys, and welcome to another video, and in this one we're going to be looking at the biggest winners and losers from the new unique items that were added in the Crucible League. And there's been quite a few unique items in this patch. Some of them are tied directly with the Crucible League mechanics, so we're not going to include those. Those are the El Abin's Visage item, that's the helmet that gives you a Crucible tree, and the Red Blade Sword and the Geomantic Gaia Staff. Those are unlikely to be staying around, I think, but the other ones are all core drop pool items, so I think they're going to stick around after this patch is done. And we'll start off with the biggest losers. We'll look at 3 of each. And we're beginning with the Storm Seeker unique gloves. Now, these, I talked about them in another video before. I think they're really interesting, but I don't really think the support is in the game for these just yet. Like, the leeching mana stat is a little bit unsupported in the current game. There's some attack leech in the game, but there's no such thing as spell mana leech. And I think to have a build that benefits from both of these stats at once is quite difficult. There is a few really limited use cases of the energy leech on like a trickster, some kind of build, perhaps using the Voltaxic Rift bow, for example, if you wanted to get like big shocks from an item whilst also having permanent energy leech and being unaffected by shock. That's quite nice, but in general, this item not very popular in the softcore trade league of Crucible. Only 3 players representing this item there. And I think, as I said, it's just a limited use case right now for this item, and quite an unpopular one right now. Perhaps later on when there's more support for this item, I think it'll see a bit more use, but that one not too popular. And we've got Blood Price. Now, this helmet was talked about a little bit when it first got announced. Some people were talking about some things that might be abusable with it, but it hasn't really been used at all. There's not very many people using it on PoE Ninja. Stats show that there's just a few people with this helmet slotted, and they don't really look like real builds, so I think they've just had these helmets slotted in at some point. This helmet, really unpopular. I think the mod where you reserve life of the enemy is an interesting concept, actually a really interesting concept, but I think the use case of this helmet and having to drop another helmet entirely just to use this thing, you also get reduced maximum life, which means it's quite a big downside on that. Large amount of regen, but I just don't think it's worth dropping your helmet for this, so unsurprisingly that one's quite unpopular as well. And there's the Chain of Endurance belt. This one is really strange. I'm not really sure the use case for this one too much. You get a bit of energy shield, a bit of maximum life, and you get the special stat here, regenerate 2% of life per second for each different ailment affecting you. And this belt is very unpopular as well. There's a few people equipping this on PoE Ninja again, and it's similar to the Blood Price helmet. This one looks like it's just being equipped on some characters that are already level 100. They don't seem to be real builds actually using this item. And this one is unsurprisingly unpopular as well. I think the use case for this would be some sort of build that has access to a lot of self-ailments that you have completely reduced effect to, so you're not really affected by them, but you're benefiting from having them on you in various different ways. But there's not really an archetype. Like, there's some archetypes that use like one self-ailment, like you have some self-chill or self-shock things going on, or self-ignite, for example, but not one that uses all of them at the same time. And I think just having 2% of life per second regenerated is really, really dull for an entire belt slot. This needs to be a lot higher, I think, for people to actually want to consider using this. So that one, not really too surprising, being unpopular. And an honourable mention has to go to the Orbalas Stand boots. And these boots are not very popular either. There's just sort of 5 or 6 players using this. But at the very least, as in comparison to the last 2 unique items, these actually look like real builds, and I think it's not really surprising that these are that unpopular as well. The modifiers here, the cannot be stunned by suppressed spell damage and debilitate enemies for 4 seconds when you suppress their spell damage. Well, really, you just want to be stun immune. You don't want to just have the stun immunity from suppressed spell damage, because then, you know, you just get hit by an attack that comes through your evasion, you get stunned, and then you die because of it. You'd rather just have full stun immunity or a way to avoid stuns. And I think the debilitate mod is nice, but not really that useful. You'd prefer to be able to actively debilitate monsters that are going to hit you before they actually hit you. These boots, not really too surprising there, so an honorable mention to those. And what about the biggest winners? Well, we've got the Ancestral Vision Jewel. Now, I did talk about this one in another video before as well. This is just such a great jewel, really, really useful. The modifiers to chance to suppress spell damage also apply to chance to avoid elemental ailments at 50% of their value. Is a great stat to have. I think any character that has capped spell suppress is going to be able to use this jewel, and it's really, really nice to be able to easily cap your elemental ailment avoidance. And about 6% of all players in softcore trade Crucible are using this jewel. That's on the PoE Ninja stats. It's most used on Deadeyes at 39% of that 6%, and then followed by Champion at 25%. And on a capped spell suppressed character, this is going to just give you 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments, and then you'll also be able to easily cap off your elemental ailment avoidance. There's plenty of ways to actually get that finished off, and that's what makes this jewel really, really useful. So not too surprising to see that one being used quite a bit. And next up we have Blood Notch. Now, I did a complete video on Blood Notch a few days back. That one was looking at the use cases for Blood Notch and how good it is in different build archetypes. And I think Blood Notch overall is quite a unique jewel in the way that it actually interacts with different game mechanics. And there's not really this kind of playstyle, hasn't been in the game too much before. And now people are kind of experimenting with that. And that one is also very popular, sitting at 6% too on the Softcore Trade Crucible League. And a massive 76% of those 6% of players are playing Pathfinder, which is not really a surprise, as I talked about in that video. There's lots of people playing like Petrified Blood on Pathfinder, but using it as a defensive mechanic rather than staying at low life. They're just using the flask tech to keep their flasks up all the time and staying at full life. And then you also have the Progenesis use case there with Blood Notch as well. And of all of those players using this jewel on Softcore Trade, a massive 97% of them are also using Immutable Force, which is the jewel that gives you massive amounts of stun recovery. And that's just a great combination of jewels there, so that's not very surprising either. And lastly, for the biggest winners of the Crucible League uniques, the Tanu Gloves. Now these ones give you some Onslaught, and they give you some Adrenaline whenever you top off your life from Life Leech. So whenever the leech actually gets removed, there's a chance there that you're going to gain these two buffs, and the chance is very low at 10% for each. The Onslaught lasts for 4 seconds and the Adrenaline lasts for 2. And I've heard a bit of mixed discussion on this one, people saying that the Adrenaline uptime isn't very good and things like that. But I think overall these gloves are quite useful in that they can be slotted into a number of builds. You can slot them into attack builds and gain even more benefit from this, like the attack speed is really nice. You could even slot them into spell builds though that have a bit of life leech in there. And obviously if you're using a build that can make benefit of Onslaught and Adrenaline, that's just a global damage buff, that's really, really nice. So it gets easily slotted into a lot of builds, which is really nice. But overall, they're pretty good gloves. They're being used by about 2% of all players on Softcore Trade. And the biggest Ascendancy representation for those gloves is the Deadeye and Juggernaut, both at about 30% of those players each. Most of those Juggernauts are using Bone Shatter, and the Deadeyes are using Tornado Shot and Lightning Arrow. And of course, an honourable mention has to go to the 4th Vow, the new body armour that was added in Crucible, that I've done a lot of videos about discussing the use cases for that. And this one comes in just behind Tanu in terms of how popular it is. And I think the reason why it is a little bit unpopular than these other unique items is because it is the body armor slot, is competing with a lot of other things, and that means that it's a little bit less used there. And that's it, the biggest winners and losers in the Crucible League for the unique items. I think there's some really interesting ones in here. I think some of the underused items, especially the Stormseeker gloves, I'd really, really like to see more support for those, so those can be used in some other builds. And I think some of these items, I look at them and I think, well, is this one of those like PoE 2 things, you know, where there's going to be a lot of different things happening with how people actually make builds, how people design builds in PoE 2, and are these going to be things that people are going to come back and look at when PoE 2 comes out and say, well, actually, that's going to be really useful now? I'm not sure. Maybe they're just generally not great items that are going to need balancing in the future, or perhaps they'll just end up staying as they are and nobody ever really touches them until one day some weird interaction comes out and suddenly these things are very meta. But we'll see, guys. What do you think about these unique items? Have you been using some of these on your characters in the Crucible League? Let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.